What if some of the greatest secrets of ancient Egypt were never meant to be seen? Beneath the golden deserts, beneath enormous pyramids, beneath forgotten temples, and even beneath the waters surrounding the ancient kingdom, another Egypt has been waiting in darkness. A world of tunnels, sealed chambers, buried statues, mysterious tombs, sacred animals, and cities swallowed by the earth. For thousands of years, these places remained hidden from human eyes. And when archaeologists finally entered them, some discoveries raised questions that still have no simple answers. We often imagine ancient Egypt as a civilization of towering pyramids and enormous temples standing beneath the open sky. But that is only the surface. The deeper story may have been built underground. In this journey, we're going 7 levels deeper into Egypt's forgotten past. We'll explore underground chambers connected to the pharaohs, enormous stone complexes hidden beneath the desert, mysterious tunnels filled with thousands of ancient remains, and a lost city that disappeared beneath the Mediterranean Sea. Some of these discoveries are completely documented by archaeology. Others remain surrounded by unanswered questions. But all of them reveal the same disturbing truth. The ancient Egyptians understood the world beneath their feet far better than we may ever fully understand. Our first discovery begins beneath one of Egypt's most famous monuments. Deep below the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara lies a vast underground labyrinth that is almost impossible to appreciate from the surface. The pyramid rises dramatically above the desert, but beneath it is an entirely different world. More than a simple burial chamber, the underground complex contains corridors, galleries, chambers, shafts, and passages extending deep into the bedrock. Some areas were carefully constructed and decorated, while others disappear into darkness. The deeper archaeologists went, the more complicated the structure became. The ancient builders were not simply digging a hole into the ground. They were creating an organized, subterranean environment beneath one of the earliest monumental stone structures in human history. There were passages leading toward chambers designed for ritual purposes. Some walls were covered with inscriptions and decorative elements. Other areas contained symbolic features connected to the beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. And this raises an important question. Why did the ancient Egyptians invest so much effort in building enormous structures beneath the ground? To understand that, we have to understand how Egyptians viewed death. For them, death was not necessarily an ending. It was a transition. The body had to be protected, the soul had to navigate another world, and the tomb itself could become a kind of map between existence and the afterlife. That belief may explain some of the underground architecture, but it doesn't explain everything. The sheer scale of the subterranean construction reveals something remarkable about ancient Egyptian engineering. Workers had to remove enormous quantities of rock, transport materials into confined spaces, illuminate dark passages, and create structures capable of surviving for thousands of years. And they did it without modern machinery. Imagine standing underground with nothing but primitive lamps illuminating the walls around you. Above your head is millions of tons of stone. Around you are passages deliberately designed to lead deeper into the earth. The atmosphere must have been terrifying. But this was only the beginning. Because elsewhere in Saqqara, archaeologists discovered another underground world, one filled not with the remains of a single ruler, but with evidence of an entire sacred industry surrounding the dead. Beneath the desert were catacombs, and some of them contained thousands upon thousands of animal remains. The ancient Egyptians worshipped many animals as sacred manifestations of their gods. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, bulls, and other creatures could become part of religious traditions that lasted for centuries. At Saqqara, underground galleries were created specifically for these sacred animals. The deeper researchers went, the more remains they encountered. The discovery revealed something astonishing about ancient Egyptian society. Religion wasn't simply expressed through enormous temples above ground. It extended underground into carefully organized networks of tunnels where the dead were preserved, placed, and sometimes buried in enormous numbers. Among the most famous examples are the catacombs associated with the sacred Apis bulls. These enormous animals were not ordinary livestock. They were connected to the god Ptah and became central to religious traditions at Memphis. The underground galleries built for them contained massive stone sarcophagi. Some of these stone containers were enormous, and moving them into underground chambers would have required extraordinary planning. Even more mysterious is what these underground spaces tell us about the people who created them. They weren't simply hiding their dead. They were constructing a connection between the physical world and the supernatural world. Every corridor, every chamber, every burial had a purpose. And yet, thousands of years later, we are still trying to understand exactly what some of these rituals meant. But Saqqara had another secret. Far beneath the desert, archaeologists encountered something even more extraordinary. A deep shaft descending into the earth, associated with one of Egypt's most powerful religious myths. And unlike the monumental pyramids above it, this discovery was almost entirely hidden from view. It would become known as the Osiris Shaft. The deeper researchers descended, the stranger the story became. And this time, the mystery was not simply about death. It was about resurrection. The ancient Egyptian belief in Osiris was one of the most important religious traditions in Egyptian civilization. Osiris was associated with death, resurrection, and the eternal continuation of life. So when archaeologists discovered a complex underground shaft and chambers connected to the Osiris cult, they found themselves standing inside a structure that may have been designed to recreate the symbolic journey of the dead. The deeper levels contained chambers carved directly into the rock. Water-filled areas appeared within the complex. Stone sarcophagi were present, and the architecture seemed deliberately designed to create a dramatic descent into darkness. Whether every element had the exact symbolic meaning later attributed to it remains debated. But one thing is undeniable. The ancient Egyptians repeatedly transformed underground spaces into sacred landscapes. The earth itself became part of their religious architecture. And perhaps that is why so many of their most fascinating discoveries are found below the surface. Because sometimes the greatest secrets of Egypt were not built to be seen. They were built to be entered. And once you descend into them, the desert above begins to feel like another world entirely. But our next discovery takes that idea even further. Because there is a place where the boundary between tomb, temple, ritual complex, and underground mystery becomes almost impossible to separate. And it contains some of the most extraordinary stone structures ever discovered beneath Egypt. The place is known as the Serapeum. It lies at Saqqara. And once you see what exists beneath the desert there, the pyramids above begin to look almost simple. Imagine walking through a narrow passage beneath the ground. The walls are made from massive blocks of stone. The ceiling disappears into darkness. Then your eyes adjust. And suddenly beside you stands an enormous granite sarcophagus. Then another, and another. Some weigh many tons. These were the burial chambers of the sacred Apis bulls. But the engineering involved is astonishing. The ancient builders created a vast underground gallery large enough to accommodate enormous stone containers. The chambers were carved and constructed with remarkable precision. How did workers transport these massive objects into the subterranean complex? How did they position them so accurately? And how did they work in darkness, deep beneath the desert, without modern surveying equipment? There are explanations based on ramps, manpower, ropes, sledges, and sophisticated organization. But even when we understand the possible methods, the scale of the project remains impressive. The Serapeum also demonstrates something important about ancient Egypt. Its underground architecture wasn't an afterthought. It was monumental architecture in its own right. The builders were willing to move enormous quantities of stone and reshape the underground environment for religious purposes. And perhaps most fascinating of all, these spaces were not isolated. They were part of a much larger sacred landscape surrounding Memphis and Saqqara. Above ground stood pyramids, temples, statues, and ceremonial roads. Below ground existed another network of sacred spaces. Two worlds, one visible, one hidden. And the hidden one may tell us more about ancient Egyptian beliefs than the monuments we see in photographs. But there is another discovery that changes the story completely. Because not every hidden Egyptian site was a tomb. Some underground spaces appear to have been connected to massive ancient settlements, religious centers, and forgotten communities. And one of the greatest examples of a lost Egyptian city was not found beneath the sand. It was found beneath the sea. Off the northern coast of Egypt, archaeologists discovered the remains of a city that had disappeared for more than 1,000 years. Its name was Thonis Heracleion. For centuries, historians knew the name from ancient sources, but they did not know where the city had gone. Some believed it had been lost to legend. Others assumed that natural disasters had destroyed it. Then, underwater archaeologists began exploring the area near the modern Egyptian coast. What they found was extraordinary. Massive statues, temple remains, stone fragments, coins, ceremonial objects, everyday artifacts, and the remains of an ancient port city resting beneath the Mediterranean. The city had not simply been abandoned, it had sunk. Earthquakes, ground instability, rising water levels, and other environmental forces appear to have contributed to its disappearance. The soft sediments beneath the region could become unstable, causing sections of the city to collapse and sink. And the Mediterranean slowly swallowed it. For centuries, the city remained hidden beneath layers of water and sediment. That accidental burial became a time capsule. Artifacts that might have been destroyed on land were protected by the underwater environment. Statues remained. Objects remained. Architectural fragments remained. And suddenly, archaeologists could reconstruct parts of a world that had effectively vanished. Thonis Heracleion was more than a city. It was a crossroads. Egyptian, Greek, and other Mediterranean influences met there. Ships arrived. Goods were exchanged, religious traditions interacted, people from different cultures moved through its harbor, and beneath the water, archaeologists discovered evidence of that extraordinary mixture. But perhaps the most haunting part of Thonis Heracleion is the way it disappeared. Imagine living in a prosperous city surrounded by temples and ships. Then imagine earthquakes shaking the ground beneath your feet. Imagine the land becoming unstable. Imagine water entering streets that had existed for generations. And eventually, imagine the entire city disappearing beneath the sea. For the people who lived there, it must have seemed unimaginable. For modern archaeologists, it became one of the greatest underwater archaeological discoveries ever made. Yet Thonis Heracleion also leaves us with a warning. Civilizations can disappear. Not always because of war. Not always because of invasion. Sometimes nature simply changes the rules. And when it does, entire chapters of human history can disappear beneath the surface. But Egypt still has another underground mystery. One that is much closer to the world of the pharaohs. A network of tunnels and chambers where ancient beliefs, royal power, and the afterlife became inseparable. And this time, we return to Saqqara. Because if the surface monuments tell us what ancient Egypt wanted the world to see, the underground chambers may reveal what they believed would happen after the world could no longer see them. The ancient Egyptian tomb was never just a hole in the ground. It was a machine of belief. Every chamber could have symbolic meaning. Every passage could represent a stage in the journey toward the afterlife. Every object placed inside could serve a purpose. And every sealed doorway could separate the living world from the dead. That is why underground discoveries in Egypt are so powerful. They allow us to enter spaces that were designed for eternity. Some remained sealed for thousands of years. Inside them, archaeologists sometimes find traces of the people who built them. Tools, pottery, human remains, animal remains, inscriptions, fragments of paint, and objects placed beside the dead. Each one is a clue. But there is another reason these discoveries are so compelling. They challenge the idea that ancient Egypt was simply a civilization obsessed with pyramids. The pyramids were only one part of an enormous cultural system. Beneath them were chambers. Around them were temples. Beyond them were tombs. Under the desert were catacombs. And throughout the landscape were shafts, galleries, corridors, and burial complexes. The deeper researchers dig, the more interconnected the system becomes. And that raises a question that still haunts archaeology. How much of ancient Egypt remains undiscovered? The Sahara is enormous. The Nile Valley has been inhabited for thousands of years. Settlements were built, abandoned, rebuilt, buried, flooded, and covered by sediment. Modern cities now stand over ancient landscapes. And beneath the desert, there may be structures that no one has entered for thousands of years. Technology is changing that. Satellite imaging can reveal subtle patterns beneath the surface. Ground-penetrating radar can detect anomalies without excavation. Magnetometry can reveal buried walls and structures. Advanced scanning can help archaeologists investigate places that would once have required years of excavation. And every new technique creates the possibility of another discovery. But there is something important we must remember. Not every underground anomaly is a lost city. Not every unusual shape is an ancient machine. Not every legend is historical fact. Archaeology becomes powerful when mystery is tested against evidence. And Egypt is filled with mysteries that survive precisely because researchers continue to test them. That is what makes these discoveries so fascinating. They don't need to prove every ancient legend true. They simply remind us that the past is incomplete. Our knowledge is built from fragments. A broken statue, a buried chamber, a damaged inscription, a forgotten tomb, a piece of pottery, a stone doorway sealed for thousands of years. And sometimes, those fragments are enough to transform an entire chapter of history. Consider what happened with Thonis Heraklion. For centuries, it was known largely through ancient references. Then archaeology found the physical city. Consider Saqqara. What appears from above to be a desert filled with monuments becomes, underground, a complex world of tombs and sacred spaces. Consider the Osiris shaft. A descent into the earth becomes a physical representation of one of Egypt's most important religious ideas. Consider the Serapeum. Massive stone sarcophagi hidden underground reveal the extraordinary importance of sacred animals and the religious economy surrounding them. And consider the subterranean chambers beneath the pyramids. The ancient Egyptians were not simply building upward. They were building downward. They were shaping both worlds, the world of the living above the earth and the world of the dead beneath it. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson these discoveries reveal. Ancient Egypt was not a civilization that feared the darkness beneath the earth. It understood how to use it. It transformed darkness into architecture. It transformed burial into ritual. It transformed stone into memory. And it transformed the desert into one of the greatest archaeological landscapes on Earth. But 7 discoveries are only the beginning. Because every chamber archaeologists enter creates another question. What lies beyond the next sealed doorway? What is buried beneath the next layer of sand? How many forgotten tombs remain untouched? How many ancient settlements disappeared beneath changing landscapes? And how many stories were lost because no one wrote them down? The desert does not give up its secrets easily. It waits. For centuries, sometimes for millennia. And when the right technology, the right researcher, and the right discovery finally come together, something buried in darkness can suddenly return to the light. That is why the underground world of Egypt is so captivating. It is not simply a collection of tombs and tunnels. It is a record of human ambition, a record of belief, a record of fear, a record of engineering, and above all, a record of humanity's obsession with defeating time. The ancient Egyptians knew that kingdoms could fall, cities could disappear, bodies could decay, monuments could collapse, but they believed that memory could survive. So they carved names into stone. They sealed objects inside tombs. They built monuments that could be seen from miles away. And beneath the earth, they created chambers designed to protect the dead for eternity. Thousands of years later, we are still opening those doors. And every time we do, the same question returns. What else is waiting in the darkness? Maybe somewhere beneath Egypt there is another tomb, another buried city, another forgotten chamber, another artifact that has been untouched since the people who created it walked the earth. And perhaps one day, archaeologists will find it. Until then, the underground world of Egypt remains a reminder that history is never truly finished. The greatest discovery may not be the one we already know. It may be the one still buried beneath our feet. So the next time you look at the pyramids, remember this. What you see is only the surface. Beneath the stone, beneath the sand, beneath the ancient landscape, another Egypt is still waiting. And somewhere in that darkness, the past may still be holding its breath. The deeper we go into Egypt, the more difficult it becomes to separate what we know from what we have forgotten. For thousands of years, the desert has covered entire layers of Egyptian history. Cities disappeared beneath shifting sands. Tombs were sealed. Temples collapsed. Underground chambers were abandoned and eventually forgotten. Yet beneath the surface, many of these places remained almost perfectly preserved. And sometimes, the most remarkable discoveries begin with something incredibly small. A strange mark. A hollow space beneath the ground, a sudden change in the soil, or an image captured by technology that human eyes could never have detected. Modern archaeology is no longer limited to digging wherever ancient monuments are visible. Scientists can now investigate the Earth without disturbing it. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, thermal scanning, magnetometry, and other technologies are revealing hidden structures across Egypt. And that has created a new possibility. There could be an entire underground Egypt that we haven't discovered yet. One of the most fascinating areas is Saqqara. For more than a century, archaeologists have been excavating this enormous necropolis. But every time researchers believe they understand the site, another discovery appears. In recent years, excavations have revealed previously unknown tombs, burial shafts, mummies, statues, coffins, and religious artifacts. Some were hidden beneath the desert for more than 2,000 years. Others belong to periods of Egyptian history that were once poorly understood. And the deeper researchers excavated, the more obvious one thing became. Saqqara was not simply a cemetery. It was a city of the dead. Imagine approaching the site thousands of years ago. Above the desert, enormous monuments rise toward the sky. But beneath your feet, workers are carving shafts into solid rock. Some descend vertically for many meters. At the bottom are chambers. Inside those chambers are coffins, statues, offerings, and objects intended to accompany the dead into the afterlife. The engineering required to construct these places was extraordinary. Workers had to calculate depths. They had to remove enormous amounts of stone. They had to transport materials through narrow spaces. And they had to create chambers strong enough to survive for generations. But there was another challenge. They had to keep the tombs hidden. Ancient Egypt experienced periods of political instability, tomb robbery, and conflict. Valuable burial objects attracted thieves. Royal and elite tombs could contain gold, jewelry, statues, ceremonial equipment, and other objects of enormous value. So underground architecture became a form of protection. The deeper the tomb, the harder it was to find. The more complicated the entrance, the more difficult it became to reach the burial chamber. and in some cases, entire shafts were deliberately sealed after the burial. Thousands of years later, archaeologists would have to break through those barriers. One of the most spectacular examples of this underground world is the discovery of sealed burial shafts containing enormous numbers of coffins. Some coffins were painted with detailed images. Others contained inscriptions identifying the individuals inside. Some preserved the faces of the dead in remarkable detail. And alongside them were statues representing gods, protective figures, and religious symbols. For archaeologists, these discoveries are more than treasures. They are records. A coffin can reveal a person's name. An inscription can reveal their profession. A burial arrangement can reveal their social status. A religious symbol can reveal what people believed about death. Even the materials used to create an object can reveal trade networks that stretched across ancient Egypt. This is where archaeology becomes almost like detective work. A single object may appear meaningless, but when researchers connect it with hundreds of others, a much larger picture begins to emerge. And sometimes that picture is completely different from what historians expected. One of the most fascinating examples comes from the discovery of ancient animal mummies. Egyptians did not only bury humans, they buried animals in enormous numbers. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, dogs, bulls, and other creatures associated with Egyptian religious beliefs. At first, the idea of millions of animal mummies might sound almost impossible. But archaeological evidence shows that animal burial was an enormous part of ancient Egyptian religious culture. The animals could be connected to particular gods. Pilgrims could purchase mummified animals as offerings. The animals were then placed in sacred underground galleries. This created a massive religious system that extended deep beneath the desert. And it reveals something fascinating about Egyptian civilization. Religion was not confined to temples. It influenced economics, art, craftsmanship, trade, agriculture, animal breeding, and even underground architecture. The creation of millions of religious objects required specialized workers. Someone had to raise the animals. Someone had to prepare them. Someone had to create the containers. Someone had to transport them. Someone had to organize the burial galleries. And someone had to maintain the entire system. This was not random activity. It was organized civilization operating on a massive scale. But then comes one of the most disturbing questions. What happened to all those animals? Were they raised specifically for religious purposes? Were some sacrificed? Were some naturally dead and then preserved? Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting different practices occurred at different times and locations, and the answers are still being studied. The deeper researchers go into these animal catacombs, the more complex the story becomes. Some tunnels contain enormous numbers of remains. Others contain carefully arranged burials. And some chambers appear to have been designed for particular species or religious traditions. It is almost like entering a vast underground archive of ancient Egyptian belief. But not every underground discovery is connected to burial. Some were connected to water, and water may have played a much greater role in ancient Egypt than we usually imagine. The Nile was the center of Egyptian civilization. It provided transportation, food, agriculture, and access to other regions. But underground water systems and wells were equally important in desert environments. Archaeologists have discovered wells, shafts, channels, and underground spaces that reveal how ancient communities managed water. This may sound less dramatic than discovering a golden mask, but in the desert, water is survival. A single reliable water source could determine where people lived, where settlements developed, where temples were constructed, and where travelers could survive. Ancient Egyptian engineers understood this reality. They developed systems for controlling water, storing it, moving it, and accessing it. And in some locations, underground structures helped protect water from evaporation and contamination. The desert above may have looked completely lifeless, but beneath it, humans were creating hidden systems that allowed civilization to survive. And this brings us to one of the most mysterious features of ancient Egyptian underground architecture: the shaft. A simple vertical opening may seem insignificant, but in Egyptian archaeology, a shaft can lead to an entire hidden world. Some shafts descend several meters. Others go much deeper. At the bottom, researchers can encounter chambers that have remained untouched for centuries. And sometimes, the shaft itself was part of the ritual. The descent into darkness may have symbolized a journey into the underworld. The person entering the tomb was physically moving downward, while symbolically approaching the realm of the dead. This is particularly important when examining the Egyptian concept of the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that death involved a journey. The deceased had to pass through dangerous regions. They encountered supernatural beings. They faced judgment, and they needed protection. This is why tomb walls often contain spells, images, and instructions. The tomb was not simply a place to store a body. It was a carefully constructed environment intended to help the deceased survive the next stage of existence. And the underground chamber became the center of that journey. Darkness was not necessarily something to fear. It could represent transformation. The earth became a place of rebirth. The dead entered the ground, and through religious belief, they could emerge into eternal life. This idea appears again and again throughout Egyptian history. It may even help explain why underground spaces became so elaborate. But there is another question. If ancient Egyptians were so skilled at constructing underground chambers, how much of their architecture remains hidden? Egypt is enormous. The Nile Valley contains thousands of years of human occupation. Every generation built on top of earlier generations. Floods deposited layers of sediment. Sand covered abandoned structures. Modern settlements expanded over ancient ones. And some archaeological sites remain difficult or dangerous to excavate. This means the map of ancient Egypt is still incomplete. Technology may be the key to changing that. Imagine being able to scan several meters beneath the desert without digging. You could detect walls, chambers, pits, burial shafts, roads, and perhaps entire structures. This is already happening in limited forms. Remote sensing has helped researchers identify previously unknown archaeological features. And as the technology improves, the amount of information available to archaeologists will only increase. But there is a darker side to this technological revolution. Every hidden structure that is discovered also raises the possibility of disturbing something that has remained untouched for thousands of years. What happens when we open a sealed chamber? What will be inside? A tomb? A temple? A forgotten settlement? Or simply an empty room? Archaeology has learned that ancient mysteries rarely behave the way we expect. Sometimes a dramatic-looking discovery turns out to have a simple explanation. And sometimes a small, ordinary-looking chamber completely transforms our understanding of the past. That is why responsible archaeology matters. The goal is not simply to find something shocking. The goal is to understand it, to date it, to examine the materials, to compare it with other discoveries, and to determine what the evidence actually tells us. Because Egypt does not need invented mysteries. The real archaeological record is already extraordinary. We know that Egyptians constructed enormous monuments. We know that they developed sophisticated mathematics and engineering. We know that they created complex religious systems. We know that they built extensive burial networks. We know that they preserved bodies and animals for religious purposes. And we know that entire settlements and landscapes have disappeared over time. The unanswered questions are enough. Why were some structures built where they were? Why did certain burial traditions change? Why were some sites abandoned? How did ancient workers organize massive construction projects? And how much knowledge disappeared when those civilizations changed? Perhaps the most fascinating mystery is not whether ancient Egypt possessed impossible technology. It is how much ancient human ingenuity we underestimate simply because the original instructions are gone. A worker leaves behind a stone structure, but not the blueprint. An engineer leaves behind a monument, but not the calculations. A priest leaves behind a ritual object, but not the complete explanation. Thousands of years later, archaeologists are left with fragments. And from those fragments, they attempt to reconstruct an entire civilization. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. And sometimes the mystery survives. Deep beneath the Egyptian desert, countless stones remain exactly where ancient workers left them. Some chambers have been opened, others remain sealed. Some tunnels have been mapped, others disappear beyond the limits of current excavation. And somewhere beneath that enormous landscape, there may be another discovery waiting. Maybe another tomb, maybe another underground gallery, maybe an ancient settlement buried beneath layers of sand, or perhaps something far more ordinary but equally valuable, a forgotten room containing the missing piece of a historical puzzle. Because that is what makes Egypt different. Every discovery does not simply answer a question. It creates another one. The desert gives us evidence, but it rarely gives us the entire story. And as archaeologists continue to dig deeper, the underground world of Egypt becomes less like a collection of isolated discoveries and more like a hidden civilization beneath the civilization we already know. A second Egypt. A darker Egypt. A world of shafts, tunnels, sealed chambers, sacred animals, forgotten people, and rituals designed to survive thousands of years. And perhaps the most incredible part is this: we are still only beginning to uncover it.